The New York Islanders and the Florida Panthers open the 2022-2023 season tonight at the UBS Arena, and we have a special crossover episode. I'm Gil Martin. He is Armando Velez. We'll preview both team seasons and the game tonight, all coming up on this special crossover episode of Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Islanders.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to this special crossover episode of Locked On Islanders and Locked On Florida Panthers. I am Gil Martin, and with me is the host of Locked On Florida Panthers, Armando Velez. I want to, first of all, take the time to thank everybody for making Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Armando, I am extremely excited to get the season started. I know we were joking before the show a little bit yesterday that our teams already have games in hand on some of the other teams, since a lot of teams started Tuesday. Some teams, even two teams, started in Prague over the weekend. Finally, tonight, we get to start the season. Are you excited?
I'm very excited. And for the Islanders, they're not starting 13 straight games on the road this time around. The NHL did them favors in order to get them the very first home game of the season as the season opener for this season. So good news for the Islanders on that part.
Yeah, 4 games in a row at home to open up this year, a far cry from what happened, as you mentioned, a year ago. Armando, let's start segment 1 focusing on the Florida Panthers winning the President's Trophy a year ago, but a lot of changes on this team, starting with a new coach, some new high-profile players. Let's start with the coaching situation. What's going to be different this year, and how is the coaching change going to affect the product and the style of hockey that we see on the ice?
Well, with the Panthers last year getting them to 122 points and the best offensive season since the 1996 Penguins, that was more of the run and gun style for the Panthers and how they got to that offensive production with a mediocre defense, but their offensive how they were on the offensive end kind of masked a lot of things as well. But hey, Sergei Bobrovsky also had a great season. Let's also not forget how great of a season he had in his third season with the Panthers. But a little bit of a different change for Paul Maurice, as they're looking to be more of a defensive responsible team, responsible in the neutral zone as well. And it's going to be a little different. Of course, Andrew Burnett has moved on to New Jersey, now is the assistant coach there, and it's a little different because Paul Maurice has a reputation of kind of overplaying his top players as far as minutes, and it's already starting off with what we saw last year in a line of Lundell, Reinhart, and Mason Marchment. Now Reinhart is slated to go on the first line starting the season. I actually want to read the lines to you and what the expected lines are going to be for tonight's matchup. Get that out of the way. So the lines for New York Islander fans to look for is Verhaeghe, Barkov, Reinhart, Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Bennett, Rudolph Balcers, Eetu Luostarinen on the wing, which is going to be something new because he was the fourth line center last year, Anton Lundell and Colin White. And fourth line is Ryan Lomberg, Nick Cousins, and Patrick Hornquist. Defensive pairings, Gus Forsling, Aaron Ekblad, Mark Stahl, Brandon Montour, and Josh Mahura and Radko Gudas. And Paul Maurice did announce that the opening night starter for the Panthers will be Sergei Bobrovsky, as expected. He's the veteran in as far as the goalie tandem. Of course, Spencer Knight was signed to that 3-year extension, but Bob is going to get an opportunity to continue to show that he was the number one guy like he did last year.
Were you surprised at all the personnel turnover that took place during this offseason?
I really was, because when it comes to the core of hockey teams, for the most part, you saw how the constant failures of the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they continued to run it back. The Pittsburgh Penguins, even though Sidney Crosby won a cup very early in his career, that there's a sense of a plateau for the Pittsburgh Penguins on them not getting a Stanley Cup for almost a decade. Even the Washington Capitals, before they eventually won, they didn't really break up the core neither. So when Jonathan Huberdeau was shipped out for Matthew Tkachuk and Mackenzie Weegar, let's not forget Mackenzie Weegar.
No.
That was a big shock, because I was thinking Huberdeau, Barkov, and Ekblad are 3 homegrown players, both top 3 picks in 4 seasons. And I thought it was going to be a group that they ran it back. But of course, Bill Zito, I think of it like this. Bill Zito wasn't the guy who drafted these guys. So there isn't as much of that emotional connection to them as someone like Dale Talon when he was here in Florida. But I just think of it as an opportunity to just extend the window, because if the Panthers had extended Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar, number one, it would have been really hard with seeing the cap hits that they have now. It would have been, there would have been to have to sacrifice 2 or 3 more players in order to fit both of them. But also that would have put Florida's window to like maybe 1 or 2 years. Yeah, they're taking a step back, but this is about building something for 4, 5, 6 years. And it's going to be some short-term pain, something I've talked about all season. But the hope is now, with about just under $11 million in cap space for next offseason, even though they're in a cap crunch this year, this is going to be something that Bill Zito is looking for as far as flexibility. Flexibility is the name of the game that Bill Zito always wants to maintain.
You mentioned Matthew Tkachuk, obviously one of the bigger acquisitions this offseason. How has he done in the preseason, and where does he fit into this team's plans?
He hasn't played too much in the preseason. Played in that second game in their split squad game between the Panthers and the Predators. Missed the last part of the preseason due to minor injuries, but Paul Maurice said that it was never going to be something that would keep him out of the lineup for opening night. And the team hasn't really had a full lineup together throughout the preseason. Patrick Hornquist has also missed a little bit of time as well. Carter Verhaeghe has missed a little bit of time too, and Colin White as well. So maybe I see it more as maintenance for these guys, but Matthew Tkachuk, he's going to be paired up with Sam Bennett on the second line, along with Rudolph Balcers. He's going to be, and Rudolph Balcers is a guy who is known as a grinder. He had his best season last year with San Jose, and usually Bill Zito gets these guys that have kind of a chip on their shoulder. And over the last 3 years that he's been here, he's gotten guys that have helped get them to the next level. And Matthew Tkachuk being reunited with Sam Bennett from their days in Calgary, it's a plus, because they know each other's games. And of course, Sam Bennett, he's resurged his career as well. He's only played around 80 regular season games with the Panthers, and he's about a point a game throughout those 80 regular season games. He was almost a 30 goal scorer this year. I know he had a 40 goal scorer last year on his line in Elias Lindholm, but don't sleep on Sam Bennett. He definitely a guy that Matthew Tkachuk can, because of past history, that could be a very valuable second line. Of course, he's also going to be on power play 1, and him and Huberdeau are 2 completely different players when it comes to what they do. Huberdeau's more of a distributor. Matthew Tkachuk is a guy who mostly crashes around the net and goes for like rebound opportunities as well. So that's a little bit of a difference in what Matthew Tkachuk brings versus Jonathan Huberdeau. And it's funny because I was just listening to 32 Thoughts yesterday, and Jeff Merrick spoke about how, and I kind of agree with him. The Panthers are likely going to miss Mackenzie Weegar more than Jonathan Huberdeau this season, because that's the part of the Panthers that is probably the weakest part of their lineup in the D-core.
I agree with you, and it'll be interesting to see how that happens. We're going to give you a chance to ask me some questions in just a moment. And of course, we will both have our predictions and our what to look for in tonight's game. So lots more to come here on this special crossover episode of Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Islanders. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you could find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf, and of course now, hockey. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On New York Islanders podcast your first listen to today on this crossover edition of our shows. Gil Martin with me, Armando Velez. And Gil, the questions that I have for you is really about how this offseason was conducted by Lou Lamoriello and the front office. For weeks and weeks and weeks, there was not a single move, free agent signing for what Lou Lamoriello was doing. The New York Islanders were rumored to possibly be in the Nazem Kadri sweepstakes. Of course, he ends up signing in Calgary. And then Lou Lamoriello was just sitting on a few signings, but not officially announced of Alexander Romanov, Kiefer Bellows, and Noah Dobson, all announced on the same day. And a lot of people, the talk was, is Lou Lamoriello kind of out of touch with this age of the NHL? I mean, he's been in the front office before I was even born. So I gotta ask you, Gil, what is the feeling and trust of this front office right now for Lou Lamoriello?
You know, the fan base was definitely frustrated. I mean, there were rumors about so many different goal-scoring forwards possibly coming. You mentioned Kadri. There were rumors about Tkachuk. There were rumors of a trade for Vladimir Tarasenko. You name it. If there was a guy out there, at some point there were rumors that the Islanders might just be interested in acquiring that player. And yet none of it happened. And yeah, I think there is concern among a large part of the fan base that says that, you know, whatever Lou's doing, it isn't working very well right now because they still want to see this team get better. And last year, we know that the Islanders were a little challenged offensively. They've never been, since Barry Trotz and Lou Lamoriello took over, a very high caliber offensive-minded team. But, you know, acquiring that player in a hockey trade or in a free agent signing would have been a big step forward for this team. They didn't take it, and there is a level of frustration right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. And thankfully for the New York Islanders, they were able to extend Mat Barzal. Of course, started off hot, over a point per game in the 2018 season, which was the same exact year that Alexander Barkov, for the most part, broke out and really turned into like one of the big stars in the NHL. But a little bit of the production was slowed down a little bit over the last few years. But what is the feeling on the extension of Mat Barzal at 9.15?
I think most fans were relieved and happy. After losing John Tavares and not being able to attract that big ticket free agent, you know, locking up your most dynamic offensive player, even if he did have a bit of an off year the last year, was a big relief. You know, Barzy had already indicated he wanted to stay on Long Island, play for the Islanders his entire career. The team certainly couldn't afford to lose him based on, you know, their lack of offensive firepower. I think both sides need to get something done to make this deal work. I think the Islanders need to surround Barzal with a little more talent, and Barzal needs to maximize his ability into more production. But you know what? The deal doesn't kick in this year. It actually kicks in next year because it was an extension. I would say by year 3 or 4, assuming the cap continues to go up, the deal will be a bargain relative to what other star players are making. The question is, does Barzal live up to it? If he does, I think they'll overpay him the first couple of years and underpay him the last few years of the deal. So it's probably right where it should be.
Mm-hmm. And Matthew Barzal is still a pretty young hockey player, so definitely an opportunity for him to get some value out of it. Daily Faceoff, from what I saw, has him on the second line with Zach Parise and Kyle Palmieri. From what I saw, I mentioned earlier Alexander Romanov, more of a defensive defenseman that they acquired, and some of the losses from the last few seasons that got them to their back-to-back Eastern Conference final appearances. Jordan Eberle claimed off the expansion draft from the Seattle Kraken, trading Devon Toews last year for I believe 1 or 2 second-round picks.
Two.
And eventually winning a Stanley Cup. So a lot of the pieces that brought them to their back-to-back Stanley Cup Eastern Conference final appearances, a few of them are gone, but a few are still here. And we spoke last season about the most disappointing player, Kyle Palmieri. What are you expecting out of Kyle Palmieri this year for the New York Islanders?
Well, to me, Kyle Palmieri is going to be one of those players who make or break this season offensively. I had mentioned on Locked On Islanders that the Islanders probably need to add 40 goals over the number they scored a year ago to realistically clinch a playoff spot and have a good chance to go on that long playoff run. Palmieri was a top 6 forward almost all year, 15 goals. He had only 1 goal in his first 29 games.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to get it done. You need a minimum of 20 and probably 25 goals, especially if he's playing on a line with Matthew Barzal, from a Kyle Palmieri. Otherwise, at $5 million a year, you're way overpaying him for second or third line production.
Mm-hmm. From what I've seen on the reporter for NYI Hockey Now, it says it's saying that Oliver Wahlstrom is likely to be scratched for opening night as he's progressing through an injury, from what I've seen. So we're likely not going to see all of Oliver Wahlstrom. But one question I also gotta ask. I really do believe that Ilya Sorokin can really challenge for the Vezina Trophy this year. I mean, just the state of New York hockey with the Rangers, with Shesterkin and Sorokin for the New York Islanders. I think that there's a chance that Ilya Sorokin can really challenge for the Vezina Trophy this year. How about yourself?
I agree. He is, right in his prime age-wise. He's got a team that still, even with Lane Lambert taking over as head coach, there's still a defense-first kind of a system. And, you mentioned Shesterkin. He and Sorokin are friends. They're both Russians. You have the Rangers-Islanders rivalry. Like, for the next 5 to 10 years, I could just see that personal rivalry and the rivalry between the two teams getting more intense. But, yeah, Sorokin, if this Islander team plays solidly in front of him, he should be a finalist for the Vezina, yes.
Mm-hmm. And last question. Of course, it's funny because I kind of went back to our crossover during it was in April, the Panthers' one and only trip to UBS Arena last year, which Alexander Barkov got a hat trick and including the game winner in that one. And I said at the time that I thought that Barry Trotz's job was safe, and you agreed with me. And of course, catching the biggest shock of the offseason coaching wise was Barry Trotz being let go. And also credit to Barry Trotz for taking some time off in order to spend with his family and taking a little bit break from coaching after doing it for so long. But my question goes to about Lane Lambert, an assistant on the staff. My question is, how much of the influence of Trotz is still how much of it is going to remain for this Islanders team? But what do you think is going to be different as he tries to implement his style of play?
Great question. I think the overall philosophy is going to be the same, but I think we'll see some tweaks. And I think Lane Lambert is what we've seen in the preseason so far. He's a little more willing to let players try to create offensively than Barry Trotz is. Now, most coaches are more willing to let their players create more than Barry Trotz is. Nothing against Trotz. He's been so successful over the years. So I think it'll be calculated chances taken, but I think we'll see more of them. And that is another factor as to how the Islanders could pick up some of those 40 goals I talked about.
Yeah, and that's the hope for the Islanders for sure, because who knows how Washington can look this season, because they're getting a little older. Pittsburgh's getting a little older. They ran it back. I still think that Carolina and New York are going to be like 1 and 2. But hey, if New York gets the offensive production that they have been looking for, maybe this is a team that could be possibly for a wild card or even in the top 3. Because I in the beginning of the offseason, I was saying that the Atlantic Division, I thought that there was going to be three playoff teams, and then the wild card possibly for the Metropolitan. Maybe with what Ottawa's doing, maybe they can sneak in. But hey, and also with Boston and them getting older and them dealing with their injuries that they've been dealing, maybe an opportunity for the Islanders definitely to possibly get in the mix here for in the postseason. But in segment number 3, Gil and I are going to discuss our predictions of tonight's matchup between the New York Islanders and the Florida Panthers. And we are going to discuss really forecasting more of the season. We're going to discuss that next on this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On New York Islanders.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, so we are back, and Armando, stylistically, how do you see the Panthers approaching this opening game on the road against the Islanders?
I think as far as the approach, I still think that at the Florida Panthers core, that they are still one of the best offensive teams in the league. And there's a chance that they might be in a lot of high scoring games in as far as this season. And that can be a very dangerous place to be for the Panthers. Maybe not in Thursday's game specifically, but it could definitely be a little bit of a concern as the season goes on. And people, especially in Sergei Bobrovsky's first 2 years, they scored a lot of goals, but they gave up a lot of goals as well. That went down a lot in year number 3, but we might be going back a little bit to years 1 and 2, even though I don't want it to. But of course, this is the short-term sacrifice that we spoke about in segment 1 about short-term pain for hopefully long-term gain for the Panthers. So I think that this is the Panthers are going to score. They're still going to score goals. Matthew Tkachuk at age 24 was coming off a 104-point season. Alexander Barkov, I know he missed 15 games last season, but it was on his point pace was at 110 in an 82-game season. Sam Reinhart started slow last year, but now he's in his second year in the system. For the Panthers, Carter Verhaeghe was one of those diamonds in the rough that Bill Zito got, along with Gus Forsing. Gus Forsing's point production is going to go up being paired with Ekblad. That's almost automatic. And Anton Lundell, second year in the league now, hopefully making that jump. With the Panthers, they also have players who have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. Colin White has dealt with a lot of injuries. Got bought out by Ottawa. The Florida Panthers decided to give him a chance. Ryan Lomberg, his games, as far as games played, around the 30s in his first season as a Panther, and around the 50s in his second year. So chances are the Florida Panthers are not going to scratch him as much this season as they did last season. As last season, who knows? Maybe Ryan Lomberg becomes a 15 to 20 goal scorer. So they're going to score a lot. The issue is defending. So in this specific game, this specific one, I'm going to say the Florida Panthers will come out with a W on the road. And the schedule, and there's only so much that you could see from last season as far as who you have on your schedule. It's very favorable as far as team results from last season, because they have the Blackhawks, the Islanders twice, Boston, who's had their fair share of injuries, Buffalo, who's rebuilding. At least those are the teams on the top of my head, because I just went over the schedule just like a few days ago. But it's very important for the Panthers to come off to a good start with Matthew Tkachuk just coming into the mix. But I'm going to say that the Florida Panthers will come out with a win on opening night on the road. But it's still, for me, even with a win on Thursday, this is still going to be a Panthers team that we're going to have to kind of see more of whether they can keep pucks out of their net. So I'm going to go maybe like a score of like maybe 4-2 on the road. I'm going to say like a 4-2 final.
Sounds like a reasonable prediction to me, but I look at it differently. I think the Islanders are going to be very eager to get off to a good start this season. A new coach, obviously, so head coaching debut for Lane Lambert after paying his dues for so long in this league under Barry Trotz. And I think that long slump in November last year, partially due to the long road trip, largely due to so many players being out with COVID, they know they can't get off to a slow start again this year. There's confidence at stake. You can't win the Stanley Cup in October and November, but you could fall out of contention and lose it in October and November. It happened last year. I think the Islanders will be very conscious of not letting it happen again. The arena should be buzzing for opening night, 50th anniversary season for the Islanders. I think Alexander Romanov will be eager to show what he can do, and I think fans will love this kid for his physicality and the style of hockey that he plays. And I think that the Islanders team defense does the job and their offense does just enough. I'm looking at a 3-2 game in favor of the New York Islanders.
And it's important. And you spoke about going out of contention in November when things happen, and there's a lot of confidence too that around national writers, at least from what I've seen last year, saying the Islanders, they have the experience, they have all these games in hand, they're gonna find a way to catch up. But there's only so much catching up you can do when you're playing so many games in so many days, and then your legs get tired, all the travel, the mental grind, being in a different city, then going back home, then going on another road trip. That takes a mental toll, probably more than a physical toll in that aspect. And it's hard for players to consistently go through that. And of course, I can understand why it's so important, because now it feels like a little bit of a sense of normalcy now for the New York Islanders. I mean, the Arizona Coyotes are going to go through a little bit of it this season, but not as much as the New York Islanders. I think Arizona's home opener is in like next week or the week after, I believe.
Yeah.
So they're not going to have as much of an extended road trip. And not saying that we're past COVID, because we're definitely not. No. But as far as the normalcy and how we've adapted to it, and the NHL is not going to lose. They're not going to lose a a lot of revenue this season with the TV deal and with rescheduling. It's going to feel like a sense of normalcy now for not only the New York Islanders, for the rest of the NHL.
I hope so. We certainly all could use it. There's no question about that. I want to thank everybody for making Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Islanders your first listen today. Now make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Steele Roden and Flip Livingstone bring you the fantasy edge to keep you ahead of the competition with daily updates of news, analysis, and advice Monday through Friday. It's available on YouTube, Odyssey, and wherever you get your podcasts.